Wisconsin, and the world. This is TMJ4 News.
I think it's so important for children to grow up with healthy outlooks and world perspectives, and they must not grow up stigmatized as a sort of untouchable in a caste system, as an individual inevitably does when he lives in a system of segregation.
Celebrating the man whose legacy for civil rights lives on. This is a day to honor Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Thank you for joining us for this TMJ4 News special as we pay tribute to MLK Day. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Meekins.
Good afternoon, and I'm Charles Benson. Today is not only a day for our nation to pause, but also continue to push forward in honoring the work and dreams of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. So let's talk about that with UW-Milwaukee professor Joe Rodriguez. He joins us now. Professor Rodriguez, thanks for joining us. There's so much that we can talk about and so little time to talk about it, but let's talk about the differences that we are seeing today and similarities to the civil rights movement of the 1960s compared to what we've seen the last year.
Well, I'd say one of the big differences is that the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s had a clear objective, which was to enforce the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. So desegregating the schools was a clear objective. They wanted also to desegregate transportation system and public accommodations. The Black Lives Matter movement is a little bit less clear on policy issues, and the defund the police. It's not real clear what exactly that means. The second difference was the religious leadership of this 1950 and 60 civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King, pastor of a Black Baptist church, the Southern Christian Leadership Council led a lot of the protests. Black Lives Matter, religious leaders haven't had the same influence or leadership roles. In some ways, they wanted to be more ecumenical, have more other religions participate, but not really make it religion a central component of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then finally, the repression. We have to remember the 1950s and 60s civil rights movement activists were assaulted, in fact, assassinated. And in some cases, there were Medgar Evers, who was the NAACP leader in Mississippi, was assassinated. That level of violence really hasn't happened with the Black Lives Matter movement. The police have been pretty constrained in comparison. So those are three, I think, differences.
Professor Rodriguez, you talk about the public's perception of the civil rights movement back in the 50s as compared to today, because we are seeing some similarities, but like as you just mentioned, there are a lot of differences.
Right. One of the big public, there was a lot of public support for the 50s and 60s civil rights movement. Remember those images of the water cannon being used, the German shepherds being sicked on the activists? That brought a lot of sympathy from many Americans and white Americans as well, who really sympathize with those activists. And you see similar things with the Black Lives Matter movement. There is a lot of support. The protests this last year, in small communities amongst whites as well as African Americans. The big difference, though, is that the local communities in the 1950s and 60s were not very supportive, of course, in the South, right? The police chiefs, the politicians were all white. A lot of assaults, arrests, of mistreatment of activists. The Black Lives Matter movement, in many cases happening in cities where African Americans are part of the leadership, have not faced that same level of local, antagonism.
Sure. Yeah. We want to continue that conversation. We appreciate you joining us, Professor Rodriguez, with your insight on this as well. Milwaukee County Transit passengers have some new artwork to enjoy. 2 bus shelters along Martin Luther King Jr. Drive are now decorated with murals of the famed civil rights leader. Each mural is made up of winning entries submitted by students to an MLK art contest. Well, Dr. King's social justice fight is still relevant today.
And Congresswoman Gwen Moore and Common Council President Cavalier Johnson are with us now to reflect on what's going today. And we're going to begin with you, Representative Moore, as the first African American to represent Wisconsin in the House and as someone who's been in the trenches fighting for civil rights. What message would you like to send on a day like today?
Thank you so much for having me. And this is an important day. I happen to be of an age where I lived contemporaneously with Dr. King, but I think it's important to portray his values for generations current and future. The message that I would give to them are things that Dr. Martin Luther King said. He said that he recognized that inequality, the inability to vote, lack of economic opportunity, racial discrimination, all these things militated against our having a more perfect union. And so the same sort of struggles that people experienced during the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction that the professor talked about when we were fighting for public accommodations for voting rights, those issues are front and center today. And it's incumbent upon every generation to fight for their rights. And so, whether you're 69 or 16, it's important to do that. We did what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, we're going to march on these ballot boxes until we elect people who will do justice. And when we did that, there was a huge backlash, but we must continue to have faith because our struggle is just.
So, President Johnson, what about that? When we look at the disparities and we look at what's happening in Milwaukee, it's still one of the worst cities in America for African Americans. And when you see those disparities, they're not just numbers. These are real life facts for many people. What needs to be done? I know that's a broad question, so how would you narrow that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Carol, for inviting Congressman Moore and myself to join you here today. You're right. Milwaukee, unfortunately, continues to, year after year, top the list of the worst. Worst place in the country to raise a Black child, worst place in the country for the education achievement gap between Black students and white students. One of the worst places in the country if you're a person of color looking for work and having reliable public transportation access to places where you can get family support and jobs. Dr. King's message, one of his last speeches was about making sure that people had the opportunity to have just those things, access to quality family supporting work. In fact, the March on Washington was not just about racial justice. It was about equality. It was about jobs too. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And we see that. You mentioned that a little bit. When we see people marching in the streets of Milwaukee today about racial injustice. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done yet, and we can get there, but we can't get there if we just turn around and not embrace new leadership, right? We have to make sure that we're always, striving to listen to people who have a different point of view. And we can't just outwardly reject something just because it doesn't fit your normal business of doing things. So that's what Dr. King represented, and that's what we got to embrace if we want to move, this thing forward for not just people of color, not just African Americans, but for all Americans.
Well, Common Council President Cavalier Johnson and Congresswoman Gwen Moore, we appreciate you being with us this afternoon and giving us your reflections. We wish we had more time to talk with you, but obviously it's very limited during this time. And still ahead, busting a move for Dr. King. We're going to be joined by Milwaukee Dance Company for a live performance to honor his legacy.
Plus, remembering a harsh past. We'll take you to America's Black Holocaust Museum, located right here in Milwaukee, about how they're bringing African American history to light.
Chief Norman here of the Milwaukee Police Department. What MLK Day means to me is humanity. Understanding the human in all of us, utilizing love, respect, compassion, understand that we're all in this together.
There's one place in Milwaukee that's dedicated to observing the ghastly history endured by African Americans while also promoting healing in the Black community, America's Black Holocaust Museum in the Bronzeville neighborhood.
And we are joined by Dr. Robert Davis, the museum's president and CEO, and Dr. Robert Smith, the museum's resident historian. They both join us now. And we appreciate you being with us this afternoon. First off, Dr. Davis, for people who have not been to the museum, the America's Black Holocaust Museum, what would you like to explain? What would you like to say to explain to them why they should go?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for hosting us, and happy MLK Day to you guys as well. The museum currently is not open because of COVID, and so we are not looking to open until sometime maybe the second or third quarter in 2021 because of COVID and the repercussions of COVID. But I want to talk a little bit about our history and the reason that I came back to Milwaukee, and that is to help to continue to serve the legacy of Dr. James Cameron, who was our founder and is one of the only people known in the United States to survive a public lynching, and then also to write a book about it, and then open a museum. And as you most eloquently said, devoted to the history, good and bad, of Black Americans and Americans in the United States through the eyes and through the voices of African Americans.
Dr. Smith, when you reflect on this day and you look at the history for African Americans, so much heartbreak, but hope, I mean, how do you hold on to hope?
Well, you have to, and it's important on this day of all days that you do hold on to that hope, and you hold on to that hope by making sure that mentally you're thinking about yourself and thinking about others with dignity, which is central to Dr. King's teachings. You hold on to that hope by being mindful of the importance of our representative democracy, which seems extraordinarily fragile at this moment. But you also hold on to that hope because, you know, we do live in a country where your voice can be heard in a number of ways. And so you have to hold on to that hope, especially today, and reflecting on Dr. King's legacies and his teachings is critical in maintaining that hope.
Dr. Smith, looking at the past and present, what can we do to make things better for our future? You have a wonderful virtual gallery that will really let people understand what has happened in American history.
You know, the future, as complicated and frightening as it feels today, you know, my 12-year-old said it best. He said, today, we have to reflect on Dr. King because of all the challenges we're facing. And we have to reflect on his teachings. We have to make sure that we're thinking about democracy, that we're thinking about state violence, that we think considerably about health and safety and as it relates to the pandemic. And what we have to do, we have a Herculean task as a country. We have to continue to address all these at the same time. And so in the future holds for us a lot of hard work, but it's the spirit of Dr. King and others that we have to hold true and close, because that will help us in these very challenging times.
Yeah, Dr. Davis, I wish we had more time because we'd like to have you add more, but we're going to have you back let us know when the museum reopens.
That sounds like a winner, and looking forward to it.
All right, thank you. You can learn more about America's Black Holocaust Museum by going to tmj4.com/links. Their website has a plethora of information about the Black Holocaust and current events affecting the African American community.
Today, we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's life and legacy. His legacy in civil rights, economic parity, and social justice, all issues of the Urban League, both nationally and locally. We commit to continue the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King through our actions and through our advocacy work.
Welcome back. We have highlighted history, we've talked about social problems, and a path toward a better future. Now, we're going to bust a move.
I hope you're not asking me to bust a move, but we do have Nefertari African Dance Company. They're going to join us now. This group is made up of performers ages 8 through 14. The group itself has been around since 1968.
And they are good. They perform locally at Juneteenth Day, Kwanzaa celebrations, even globally in Africa, Taiwan, and Japan. The Nefertari African Dance Company, thank you for being with us. We're going to let you take us to a break, so take it away.
Go.
And we'll be right back. Aren't they great?
And this day means a lot to me. This is a day that I always find a way to give back, because when I think about what Dr. King stood for, it was about giving back and making change and delivering hope in this country. And not just for Black people during the Civil Rights Movement, but for everyone here in the United States of America. And I know that I plan on giving back on this day, and I hope you will too.
A lot of reflections on this day. Milwaukee's Home Bridge will light up tonight in honor of Dr. King and his civil rights legacy. And in partnership with Milwaukee's Urban League, after sunset tonight, the home will be lit in red, green, and black. That symbolizes the Pan-African flag. You can see it in person from dusk until 2 a.m. or just go on Facebook Live. It begins at 9 o'clock.
Thanks for joining us. We had a